What is going on, guys? This is your boy Josh Burton from Everything College Basketball, and we have a special episode, if you want to call it that, a YouTube exclusive here today. I'm, of course, here with our good friend Hunter from NKY Bracketology on Twitter. Is a great bracketologist. Was on one of our shows just recently. We were talking about it on the show. I think it was like episode 211, 212. It's back in the archives on the Everything College Basketball feed. You can go back and watch it. We brought Hunter on today. We decided, you know what? He's a great friend of the show, votes on our top 25, and he's a great bracketologist. So let's get with Hunter and do our first ever ECB Bracketology in correspondence with NKY Bracketology. We're going to use his full bracket. It's got a full bracket reveal we're about to drop to you, drop some knowledge on your head tonight. And we cannot wait to get into what Hunter sees as the current day bracketology as we sit here on February 2nd. A little over a month away from the actual thing playing out on Selection Sunday. Before we get into all the brackets and reveals, bubble, and all that fun, Hunter, I'm happy that you decided to do this with us tonight. I know it's a fun endeavor. It's a full bracket reveal, man. We've got graphics and everything.
So just first, appreciate you inviting me on to do it. Honored to be the first one to kind of do this with you guys. Brackets are interesting, especially this time of the year. They're so fluid. So I'm excited to get to put one together. I don't put a ton of these together before Selection Sunday. So doing one today kind of gets me a little bit of practice, and we get to see where some of your favorite teams are going to end up. Definitely a fun day to do it, especially with all the chaos yesterday. So happy to get into it and thankful for the graphics and everything you've provided today.
Yeah, no, dude, like I said, you're the first one on our team sheet here that we decided to make the call to. And I think it's people are watching. Let's get right into it. And what we're going to do is we'll start on the bubble. So as you can see here in the first graphic, we have listed out like normal the last four buys, last four in, first four out, and then the next four out. So let's go ahead and break this down, Hunter. When you look at this right now, the last four in, we'll begin there. Georgia, BYU, UCF, and USC, coming off their big win last night against Michigan State, has found themselves in the last four in. Anything about this group? I know Georgia is kind of falling at the moment right now. It's a hard life in the SEC this year. We all know that. But I think a few weeks ago when we talked, they were pretty solidly in. Now they're kind of creeping right there on the edge of the bubble, living on the end of edge of a razor's blade here, if you want to call it that. Talk to us about these last four in, Beth.
So BYU, UCF, USC, all three are brand new to the bracket. This is the UCF's been in and out, but since November, BYU and USC have been out. They have both come on strong recently. BYU's just really benefiting from the Big 12 play. UCF, kind of the same thing. You're playing a lot of good games, a lot of good competition. BYU did actually beat UCF yesterday in Orlando. So that jumped them up from about fourth or fifth out to actually up into my bracket. USC, like you mentioned, kind of hanging around. They've been just lurking maybe 15 or so spots out for maybe 6 weeks or so. It's been just kind of a messy first year for the Musbus in LA, but he's starting to get things aligned. Des Claude leading the charge out there. They've now got 3 quadrant 1 wins, and they have a bad loss, but I mean, they've got a solid little resume they're starting to put together. Some of their metrics still need to bump up just a little bit, but we're getting there. Just enough for me to kind of want to put them into the bracket for now, but very fluid between them, Arizona State, Wake Forest, Nebraska, Pittsburgh. And then to go back up to Georgia. Yeah, they are free falling right now, just absolutely getting destroyed in SEC play. It just comes down to the SEC's killing them right now.
So on USC, like we mentioned, coming off the big win at home yesterday against Michigan State, obviously a huge quad one. I'd have to look it up. Did that qualify as a Q1A for them? Is Michigan State in that Q1A for them right now?
No, it is Q1, just like a Q1B, because they are 20th in the net right now.
Okay, so right on the border of kind of a Q1A, but nonetheless a Q1 for them. And you mentioned the other kind of wins that they have. They got Illinois, which is obviously a Q1.
Yep.
Bad losses. Would you qualify? I don't know if California considers a bad loss. I think that would be, I'd have to look up the net. It's probably what, a Q2, Q3?
It's Q3, 130th. Q3. If it was on the road, I wouldn't bat an eye at it, but losing that one at home, it's a bad loss. But it's not as bad as like, I don't know, New Mexico having the quad 4 loss to New Mexico State. Like, it's not terrible.
So at the moment they have a couple Q1s in Illinois and Michigan State. They've got a Q3 in California, but the rest of the resume, I mean, neutral site loss to St. Mary's, New Mexico, home loss to Oregon, home loss to Michigan, away to Indiana. I know that doesn't necessarily hurt them. And then home to Wisconsin, kind of another one of those Q1S teams right there. So their resume, all in all, 2 good wins, 1 bad loss, and then a bunch of losses that doesn't really hurt them. When you look at USC's schedule moving forward, on Tuesday, the February the 4th, they're on the road at Northwestern. Another, let's say they do lose, that obviously hurts the resume, but it doesn't hurt it in the sense of a quote unquote bad loss. Then they followed up the 7th, they're at Purdue. That's definitely not a bad loss. That's one of those ones, and weirdly enough, you kind of qualify as a good loss, if that makes sense, if that was to happen. Yeah. So again, USC, when you do look at it, I mean, if they were to knock off Purdue, that's a massive Q1A for them, or Q1 at least there for them.
Q1A,
and then so then you have Oregon in a return. So there's opportunities to improve that resume. And I don't think, unless it's a Minnesota loss, a whole lot of opportunities to do a ton of damage. They can't lose them. But
Minnesota, Washington would both be rough losses. Neither one's going to like torpedo a resume. That Northwestern game on Tuesday night, the 4th, is pretty important though. It's a road game, but Northwestern is lurking just outside of these like 8-9 teams out. You wouldn't want to lose to another bubble team, even if it is on the road.
Right. And that makes sense. But I mean, the fact that USC is now considered inside the field of 68 is pretty impressive considering where they were not only just 2 weeks ago. Let's move backwards to the last 4 byes, which, and for people who don't know, that means they're in the field. They wouldn't have to play a game in Dayton, but they're teetering right now. They could go either way. And I think in your seed line, those we'll see in the bracket here in just a bit, the last 4 byes are typically 10 seeds, right? Yep. So the one we just talked about, for those who listened earlier today to episode 214 of the Everything College Basketball Podcast, we spent some time talking about Gonzaga. Coming off of a loss on the road to St. Mary's last night. This is a team that has 7 losses already, 3 in the WCC, and there's potential for more. We theorize a world, and we even gave a percentage chance of Gonzaga not making the NCAA tournament because there are losses still out there. They've got 2 games with San Francisco. They've got Santa Clara again. They've got another game with St. Mary's, and they've got at Washington State. There's a chance to lose more games.
Yes.
What's the likelihood for you? I know you have them in now technically safely, but they're not going in the right direction. What's the likelihood that when we get to Selection Sunday, that Gonzaga is not in your NCAA tournament?
That is, I'll say 35%. I mean, just assuming they win their home games and then they beat Pacific on the road, they could probably split the Santa Clara and Washington State games, and then they would need to split with San Francisco as well. So assuming they win those games and they split like that, I think they'll be okay. I don't necessarily think they're going to be comfortable this year.
Yeah. The other one on the last 4 byes I want to touch on is New Mexico. Now, they are the first of your last 4 byes, meaning assuming they're heading in the right direction to jump up a seed line or 2 to maybe get to like the 8-9. I don't know what their ceiling is, but coming off of a dominating performance against Utah State, who's safely in the field right now, on the road in a big-time Mountain West game last night on Saturday, February the 1st, is New Mexico one of those teams that are trending upwards? And prior to the win last night, where would you have had them?
So prior to the win last night, I had them as my first team not in Dayton. So they were the last of the last 4 byes there. They jumped up just 2 spots this morning. I was still kind of working with some data that some of the metrics had not updated yet. I would probably move New Mexico up to the 8-9 line now, more than likely on the 9 somewhere right there with Utah State. So probably a little bit higher than the last 4 byes, but nonetheless, still teetering in the right direction. That loss to New Mexico State just makes it hard because Q4 losses like that are just so difficult to get past.
So I think that's a good example for kind of novices, is like, it's a reason why you don't want to lose those quote unquote bad games early, because no matter what they're doing, that Q4 is lingering heavy right now, despite the fact that they've been on a roll in the Mountain West Conference. So could ultimately the Q4 loss could determine a seed line for them, is what it sounds like.
Yeah, and I don't think the Q4 loss holds them out of the tournament or anything like that. If they pick up additional Q3 and Q4 losses. That's separate, but it's enough to at least like ding them. Maybe a full seed line. That's a good comp. The other thing that hurts them is them being a mid-major. Yeah, they played UCLA, St. John's, USC, VCU, but once you get to their schedule in the conference, it's very weak compared to a lot of these other power conference teams, especially in the Big Ten and the SEC, who are playing 15, 16 Q1 games.
Right.
New Mexico has 3 right now total. They're 2-1 in the quad one.
Yeah, and that's the life of being a mid-major. We talk to Coach Fair all the time about it. Is like your limited opportunities. You got to take them when you get them, and you can't lose the ones you're not expected to lose. On the last 8 out, assume basically your first 4 out and the next 4 out. Of the teams, like Xavier been surging lately. They're starting to get healthy. They've got some nice wins under their belt the last few weeks. That's a team that I think, again, a few weeks ago when we talked, probably wasn't in contention, but you knock off Connecticut, you get some big wins. Now you're starting to fight your way back into the bubble. Wake Forest, let's talk about the Demon Deacons. Good win in theory against North Carolina, but then you drop Duke, which nobody faults. If they get Duke, let's say last week they beat Duke, are they in the last 4 in, and let's say like a UCF or Georgia or somebody's out?
If Wake had beaten Duke, they would probably be in the last 4 byes right now. They'd be clearly in. That would have been, buys.
Wow.
That'd be one of the better wins that you can get. I mean, it's Duke. Duke is clearly like second best team, third best team in the country right now. So that's a 6 or 8 spot difference for me.
That's interesting. And Wake, we know last year the struggles, they beat Duke late in the year. Everybody, including ourselves here, thought, man, they're going to make the tournament, and then they falter at the very end of the year. Yep. What does Wake have to do besides the obvious winning games? The ACC, though, not going to give you a lot of Q1 opportunities this year. The league is down. They've lost to Duke. They got blown out by Louisville. So what does Wake, in theory, have to do?
I'll say they need to go 2-1 in their quad 1 games. So that's at Stanford, at SMU, and then at Duke. You got to find 2 road wins there. That's not going to be easy by any stretch. And then they've got 4 quad 3 games. I don't think they can afford another quad 3 or a quad 3 loss at all.
Let's talk about the next 4 out. We have a huge Indiana contingent that follows everything college basketball. The Hoosiers on the next 4 out. Essentially, they're 5 spots for making the NCAA tournament bracket right now. I know getting the win against Purdue this past Friday night would have vaulted them probably, if not in the tournament, maybe that first 4 out. But they keep dropping these games. The good thing for them, the Big Ten does allow for multiple quad 1 opportunities. When you look at the Hoosiers, I'm about to pull their schedule up now. When you look at the Hoosiers, despite all their flaws this year, 14-8, 5-6 in the Big Ten, and their next couple, Wisconsin, Michigan, Michigan State, UCLA and Purdue is their next 5.
Yeah.
What does IU have to do in theory to get on the right side of the bubble?
If we're so I'll go ahead and extrapolate out the rest of their schedule. So it's those 5. They get Penn State, they're at Washington, at Oregon, and then they host Ohio State to end the year. That is just a hell of a stretch. I mean, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 quad 1 games, 2 quad 2 games, and that's what you've got. Let's say that you split the quad 1. Let's say you go 4-3 in the quad 1, and then you split the Penn State and Washington games. That gets you in relatively easily. If you go 3-4 and win both of the quad 2 games, I think you're going to be okay. But realistically, you're probably going to need not a winning record, but you're going to need like 1 game under 500 in the rest of these 7 games.
Is there a team, and I'm always curious to ask this, is there a team on their schedule that they've already played that they desperately need to put some wins together to help that strength of resume?
So what do you mean? Like, is there a team behind them that could help their resume by just winning?
Like for instance, we just talked about USC.
Yeah.
Right? They're on the right side of the bubble.
Yep.
Indiana beat USC back on January 8th. If USC gets hot and starts winning a bunch of games, that in theory is going to move them up in the net rankings, move up the KenPom record and all that. Does that help Indiana as much as people think? Because all of a sudden, maybe a quad 2 win could potentially maybe become a quad 1, which would help bolster Indiana's resume and tournament hopes.
So there are teams like I'm going to use Rutgers for a second as well. They're 76th in the net right now. The quad one road game cutoff is 75. So if that flipped, I know Rutgers was a home game for Indiana, but USC is already, it's a home game. USC 68, so that puts it as a quad two game. To get to quad one, it would need to hop up to 30. USC is not going to get to 30. Looking at Indiana's schedule, I don't see necessarily anybody that pops off the radar that's going to move up. Their losses aren't bad. None of them are outside of quad one, so that's great. All of those losses will be fine. I don't think so. You could maybe look at Washington to potentially move up if they get hot. They're 93rd in the net right now, and that could help their get another Q1 game under their belt, but I don't necessarily see anybody like that for them. USC making the tournament would give them a win over the field in quotes, which is a good thing, but that's not an official metric. That's an individual type of evaluation.
Right. And I'd like to ask these questions because I think the typical fan are curious and maybe think that, like, well, if USC wins or whatever, maybe the case could help. And the last team before we move on from the bubble is obviously North Carolina. We talked about Georgia. Carolina is a complete free-for-all. They have no big. They don't defend particularly well, and they're so dependent on their guards playing well. They just got blown out by Duke. Yeah. Carolina's in bad shape, but yet you still have them in the next four out. Talk to us about North Carolina, and despite their play right now, they're still kind of hovering around that bubble at 13-10.
So to kind of caveat here, the first six out are very, very close. The rest of the people out are not super close at all. I have Arkansas, I have Dayton right there with UNC and SMU. North Carolina's metrics are solid, so they are still in consideration, but they're falling. I mean, that loss last night hurt them. They're now 13-10. They need to get hot. They probably need to win. I don't want to say win out, but they probably can take one more loss the rest of the year and get in.
And the schedule's not favorable. Even though the ACC is down, Carolina's not good. And their next two, they're home against Pittsburgh, away against Clemson, two teams at the top of in the top four of the ACC. So, yeah, it looks like Carolina's going to have to go to the ACC tournament and do a lot of work in order to try to get an NCAA tournament, it looks like. Yeah. Let's move on. Let's get to the actual field at this point. And we'll begin with what's the overall number one seed. No surprise to anybody. We'll start the South region with Auburn. Yep. Like, no surprise. I don't know, and I would like to ask you, unless I guess they just lose out, I don't know if there's anything Auburn could do at 20-1, 8-0 in conference play, still a bunch of games ahead of them, but I don't know there's much they can do to completely screw this up of not being a for sure number one seed.
I agree. I mean, they already have 12 quadrant one wins. If they lose out, maybe they fall to a 3. But, I mean, in reality, Auburn's not going to lose out. I don't see a path where this team doesn't end up as a 1 seed. I think you can make the same argument for Alabama and Duke as well. I just think those two teams are as good, but I do think Auburn's head and heels the best team in the country.
And then we'll look at the rest of your bracket here. 8-9 matchup. Oklahoma against Utah State. We just talked about Utah State taking a big home loss yesterday to New Mexico as a 9 seed. Oklahoma comes in as an 8. Now, as Oklahoma's, they've struggled in SEC play. I know here lately they've tried to kind of figure things out. But this is a team that was 14-0 heading into SEC play and kind of found out the hard way that this conference, it's a beast of bear right now. Exactly. But they're still clocking in as an 8 seed. So talk to us about Oklahoma.
As I pull them up real quick, one team this year, there's been a lot of conversation about a 6-12 team in the SEC getting in. I think that Oklahoma is that team that can go 6-12 in SEC play and get in, just because they don't have a loss outside of SEC play, just like you talked about. The wins over Arizona and Louisville are great wins. Win over Michigan, there's 3 just great wins already. So most bubble teams are not going to have 3 great wins. And they've quietly won 3 of their last 4, including putting up, I think, 40 or plus 40 against Vandy in the second half yesterday. Just absolutely walked them off the court. It was absurd to watch. So they're finding their stride. They did have a tough start of the season Bama, Texas A&M, Georgia, a desperate Texas team back to back to back to back is tough. So it gets a little bit easier. I say easier, but they're going to get teams in the 30s of the net instead of the teens. So it's not necessarily going to be a cakewalk, but there's some opportunity there for Oklahoma to be fine.
Also in this region, we talked when you were a guest on the show a few weeks back, Louisville Cardinals. And at that time, they had won like 5 in a row. They got the win streak all the way up to 10 in a row before getting beat by Georgia Tech on the road yesterday. How much did that Georgia Tech loss affect Louisville and their seed line? And when you look forward, I think they're still a really good team. That's, to me, it's just a bump in the road on a road environment, and they're going to be fine because, again, the ACC is not good this year.
Yeah.
So when you look at the Georgia Tech loss, how much did that affect Louisville's seed line today? And again, I think you said on the show their ceiling is somewhere like a 4 or 5. Do you think that's still attainable for the Cardinals?
I think realistically a 4 is still possible. Looking at their schedule, they don't have another quadrant 1 game on the schedule the rest of the year. So a 5 might be their ceiling now. This did drop them a full seed line for me. I mean, it's Georgia Tech. It's a quad 2 loss. It's not terrible, but these teams are just so jumbled right there that it makes a difference. And this is not a good Georgia Tech team.
No, it's definitely not a good Georgia Tech team. Also in Louisville, I do have a question. I'm curious on how much like the conference tournaments. I know, especially if your conference tournament championships on a Sunday, like the Big Ten and SEC, that we've been told and seen for years that the committee does not care about those results unless somebody has an opportunity to steal an automatic bid. ACC title games played on a Saturday night. Let's assume and kind of play out that Louisville runs the table, meets Duke on Saturday night in the ACC tournament championship and beats Duke. Then could you foresee a 4 seed or maybe higher?
I still think a 4 seed's probably their tip-top ceiling just because they've only got 4 quadrant 1 wins. They might pick up 2 more if they sweep the rest of the year at most. I think 6 quad 1 wins probably puts you in that 4 line area. I don't know that the committee will value that though. By Saturday night, the committee is already looking to get these teams into seed pods and get like, I don't have on the graphic, my regions with like the pods are not on there, but like Auburn's going to Raleigh. They have to coordinate all of these different bracketing principles, and that includes any rematches or anything like that. And then you have to give all of these teams treatment based on where they're located. So like for Auburn, they're going to Raleigh because that's the closest place to them. Like that all has to be ironed out, and that can't be done quick. It did take me about 3 hours to do that this morning. So the committee with a bunch of people, it does take a while. So typically Saturday night and Sunday are focused on that area of the thing as opposed to actually selecting seeds for teams. But I do think Louisville could get a 4 seed if they won out.
So the last one in this region I just want to ask you about, Iowa State down to a 2 seed. When we talked a few weeks ago, they were clearly a number 1 seed. But back-to-back losses this week to Arizona and getting absolutely destroyed on your home floor by Kansas State has dropped them to a 2. And you were talking about your seed list. I have it pulled up here on my phone. Iowa State's not only a 2 seed, but they're the 3rd 2 seed behind Houston and Purdue. How bad have those 2 losses affected their seed line?
So Arizona loss on the road, not terrible, is what it is. It made them, they were my 5th overall going into yesterday. The Kansas State loss by 19 dropped them several more spots. Going into that game, they had already jumped back up to the 1 line, just in my like live like seed list. And then that Kansas State's just appalling. I was shocked. It killed them. It doesn't necessarily end their 1 seed hopes, but they have no room for error anymore.
Interesting. And I just projecting out because brackets are always fun when you look at potential matchups here. Like that, if this was the bracket, 5-12, Ole Miss, McNeese State, who's figured out in conference play, that would be a lot of fun. I think Stanford and Wisconsin has an upset special written all over it. Yeah. And to be completely honest, we're talking a lot about Louisville. There's a world, if this was the bracket, I could see Louisville coming out to the Sweet 16 or beyond. I really do. Fun stuff there, but that's the South region as of today. Let's move on to the West, and in the West we see Tennessee, the number 1 seed. Explain that to us.
So Tennessee, somebody has to go there. Unfortunately, this is the 4th overall seed. somebody has to fill that spot. We can't have 5 2 seeds as much as I would rather just have 5 2 seeds. I don't know that Tennessee's necessarily the team that'll end up there. I do think it's going to either a Big 12 or a Big 10 team when all is said and done. But for now, Tennessee holds on to that fourth 1 seed. 5-4 in quadrant 1, no losses outside of quad 1. All their metrics look top 4 or 5 in the country. So no real blemishes on the resume, but it is kind of lacking just at the top a little bit.
Well, conversely, Houston in that same region out west as the 2 seed. On your seed list here, you have Houston as the number 1 2 seed. Now, they lost yesterday in overtime at home to Texas Tech in kind of a weird day of college hoops. How easily could these two teams flip when Selection Sunday comes out?
Very easy. And Houston is not the only team kind of in that discussion by any means right now. I think Purdue, Iowa State, Florida, Texas A&M, Marquette, Michigan State all really have a shot. Houston is for now there just with their metrics being so good. They are just the efficiency darlings of Ken Pom and Bart Torvik right now. So that is why they're kind of hanging out there. But don't be surprised if there's 6 or 7 different teams rotating in those spots as we go along.
And then you look also in this region right here, Michigan State took a loss as well yesterday, but this was on the road to USC, as we mentioned earlier. Like Sparty is really good this year. Izzo has a team that kind of fits his style and play and adaptability. Really good freshman and Jace Richardson. Really good leadership in Jaden Atkins. You just mentioned them. They're a team that could obviously jump a couple seed lines if they keep winning out. What do you foresee for Michigan State here? There are 3 right now. I know you've talked about a potential jump, but when you look ahead to Michigan State, where do you foresee them kind of that final seed line?
Pulling up their schedule real quick. But I think, again, this is another team with 7 or 8 more quadrant 1 games on their on their schedule left to go. There's every possibility they jump to that final 1 seed. I think the Purdue matchup on the 18th of February might just be one of the deciding factors in who gets a 1 seed and who gets a 2. But I think that Michigan State's probably headed for a 2 seed if I had to guess. Now, of course, if they stop playing as well as they have, that'll change. But for now, they're on that like 2 seed trajectory to me.
Two teams that are surging that I want to talk about in this region as well. You have Arizona up to a 5. Now, if you said this back in December when they were struggling to win games, no chance in hell anybody believed you, but they're up to a 5 because of their play. Obviously, the Iowa State win goes a long way in that process right now. And then Missouri. Missouri just went to Mississippi State and blew the doors off the Bulldogs 88-61. This is a team that plays a fun style, high tempo. They've got veteran dudes. Caleb Grill went for 20 last night. Both teams are surging. Arizona 5, Missouri is 6. When you look at both of these teams kind of jumping up the charts here, what do you see in both of them?
So neither team has a loss outside of quad 1, which is huge. I know we kind of keep touching on it, but a lot of these teams in this area do have a quad 2 or a quad 3 loss. So avoiding those bad losses in the non-conference especially is great. Right now, Arizona's got 5 quad 1 wins. They've played 11 quad 1 games. Missouri's got 4 quad 1 wins with 8 quad 1 total. Neither one's got bad metrics. The resume-based metrics are a little bit better for Missouri than they are for Arizona, but then Arizona's got the predictives. So that's why I've got Arizona just ahead of Mizzou right now, but it is very close.
And then the defending 2-time champs UConn clocks in as a 9 seed. We know their struggles at Maui, then they presumably fix it. Then Lee McNeely gets hurt. They lose to Villanova. They lose to Xavier. But they go on the road in another tough environment and beat Marquette yesterday. 2-part question real quick on UConn. To me, they don't seem like a 9 seed. That seems maybe it's just recency bias. They seem like a team that should be higher seeded, and maybe at the end of the day they will be. But other part of that, if this was the bracket on Selection Sunday, and you're very accurate, poor Tennessee. Because do you really want to play UConn in the second round?
This is a absolutely stacked bracket. I was like looking through this and I'm like, this is just a bracket of death for whoever. All of these, it's balanced correctly per the committee's guidelines, but it's tough. UConn though, just the 4 quad 1 wins. They've got 2 quad 2 losses and a quad 3 loss. There's a lot to drag their resume back down. And there's not a lot of that high-end win. I mean, Gonzaga's not great. Texas is not great. Baylor's not great. That's 3 of their 4 quad 1 wins. Obviously, the Marquette win yesterday is elite and a great quad 1A win. But other than that, this resume is just lacking for me. If they're healthy, though, they are not a 9 seed kind of team. And I would be terrified to see them if I was Tennessee.
And I'll ask you the same question on them real quick that I asked for Indiana about. Is there a team that they probably need to win? Like, I look at UConn, correct me if I'm wrong, but like if a Baylor, who's coming off of a big win against Kansas, they've got Texas Tech coming up, they're playing in a brutal Big 12. Let's say they get hot and start winning. They're 25th in Ken Palm.
Yeah.
Is that one of those examples, though, that like Baylor gets hot and UConn finds their way and continues to win? That theoretically bumps that win up even more, right? I know it's already a Q1, but is that kind of a deal that's translative there?
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. I don't know that Baylor, I think they would have to get to 10 to be a quad 1A to really make a ton of difference. But Baylor playing well will look good for UConn for sure. Same thing about Texas. That's a road win against Texas. They want that to stay quad 1A. So Texas being 25th right now, if they fall below 30, that would drop. Georgetown and Butler are 85 and 86 in the net right now. Both of those are quad 2 wins on the road. One of those two could feasibly get to 75 by the end of the year. That would be something to just like add another little feather into their cap. I think those are the two that I'd probably keep an eye on the most for UConn. I think UConn is probably going to help Creighton and help Xavier a little bit more with them continuing to win and jump up the net as well.
I will say, if this is the bracket, let's say Houston gets by William and Mary, which they should. Them against UCLA, San Diego State would be ugly basketball.
Yes. Yeah, it would
so
be.
Ugly. Like in comparison, you look at other teams that potential matchup, like Oregon, Arizona would be fun. Michigan State, Missouri would be a lot of fun if that happened. Yep. UCLA or San Diego State against Houston would be disgusting basketball.
Yeah,
I'm just saying. Let's move. First to 40, 45 wins that game, right? Let's move on to the Midwest region. Your third 1 seed here is Alabama Crimson Tide. They are surging right now. Obviously, they played a brutal non-con schedule, plenty of quad 1 opportunities. Don't think they have a bad loss to their resume. They bring up the field here in the Midwest region. Their 2 seed is Purdue, who is surging as well. Had some struggles, have figured it out, get a big rivalry win against Indiana, who really challenged them on Friday night. The aforementioned Gonzaga. Now, this is the one I want to talk about. Gonzaga, we talked about the reasons that they're in right now as kind of that last 4 buys. But St. John's, we brought it up on today's show a little bit ago. The Johnnies have 3 losses. They're 19-3. They are 5 points away from being 22-0.
Yeah.
They've lost 3 games by a combined 5 points. They have an opportunity coming up in their next 4. They're leading the Big East now. They have an opportunity. They've got Marquette, Connecticut, Villanova, and Creighton coming up. They go 3-1 in that stretch. They're probably going to win the Big East.
Yeah.
But you have St. John's as a 7. Is it simply because the quality of win is not as impressive compared to other teams, despite how good they've been?
Yeah. I mean, their best win right now is New Mexico at home. I mean, they have a quad 1 win against Xavier. That's technically their only quad 1 win, but they're not a tournament team right now. So they're 1-3 in quad 1 with 5 Q2 wins. They are 8-0 and 5-0 in quadrants 3 and 4 respectively. When you just have that much of a balance on the back end, it just makes it so hard to get a team up the seed list. The good thing for them, they play 9 more games. Only one of those is not quadrant 1 or quadrant 2. So we're going to find out about the Johnnies real quick. I think they're more of a 4 or 5 seed from what I've seen on them, but they've got to go out and prove it on the court.
And let me clarify before people kind of come at both of us here. When I said Alabama is your third 1 seed, not according to your seed list, they're actually second behind Auburn, but based on how the brackets play out, like left side, right side, we're just going down this list. I just meant that they're the third 1 seed that we're talking about. I just want to clarify because people are going to be like, well, how could Alabama be behind Tennessee? Okay, whatever. St. Mary's 8 seed. Yeah. Now, you look at their resume, they got the win over Gonzaga last night. But 24th in Ken Palm, they're 20-3, 10-0 in the WCC. But they're non-con opportunities for big wins. They lose Arizona State. They lost to Boise in a semi-away game. and they lost to Utah State. They didn't pick up, I guess, USC. Since USC surging, you can count that. However you want to look at Nebraska, I know they were on that first 4 out, I do believe, if I look back on that.
Yep.
Akron's a good team. Towson, I get it, but I don't know. Maybe Utah State, maybe Boise. I'd have to look at considered Q1. You'd have to fill me in. But the point being is their resume's not sexy, but yet they're winning. So how do you judge St. Mary's? You do have them in 8, but how do you judge them going forward?
So I feel like every year St. Mary's is the same team. I feel like we did this last year. I feel like we'll do it next year. They're 2-1 in quadrant 1. They're 5-2 in quadrant 2. 12 of their 22 games have been played in quadrants 3 and 4. That is just life as a mid-major. It is what it is. It's hard to judge them, but the back-to-back quad 1 wins they picked up this week jumped them from my 11 line all the way up to an 8. So they finally kind of solidified their resume a little bit. They're on some stable ground. They do have 2 more quadrant 1 games in a row here. They've at San Francisco, at Oregon State, and then they have to go to Gonzaga later in February. So there's plenty of opportunity for them. Overall, their metric profile looks good. They don't have any bad losses. They are a team very much so that we talked about, like, gaining just by other teams surging. Nebraska and USC are both right on that cut line of quad 1, quad 2. They could really use both of those 2 teams to win and kind of jump them up into quadrant 1. So there's some opportunity there for sure.
This region right here is kind of the region of opportunity in a way, because West Virginia, who theoretically would be playing St. Mary's in this matchup, great wins, phenomenal wins so far. Not the greatest against teams maybe they should beat, but they've got wins over Kansas, wins over Iowa State, et cetera, et cetera. The fact that West Virginia is even in tournament discussion this year, let alone solidly in as high as a 9 seed. Yes. The job that Darian DeVries, with Tucker DeVries being out, riding Javon Small, who's, in my opinion, maybe the Big 12 player of the year based upon his play right now. Just the job that West Virginia has done, and kind of where do you see them going when we get to Selection Sunday?
So I think they're going to go up. They're probably honestly going to move up this week. They're beating, last I checked, they were beating Cincinnati by like 18 or so. So they are going to move up metric-wise. That'll be a positive win and a quad 1 win. So that will help them probably get them off the 9 line and up to the 8 line. DeVries is my pick for coach of the year right now in the nation. I think what he's done there is just absolutely amazing. Probably looking somewhere between a 6 and a 9 seed if I had to guess at the end of the year. They've got a pretty good schedule, like favorable schedule for the rest of the year in the Big 12. So I would expect to see them hopefully healthy, but somewhere in that 6 to 9 range.
Also looking at the Kansas Jayhawks, they are struggling. Like, I know resume, like they're 10th in KenPom, so the metrics still favor them. They don't have a bad loss to their name. Losses on the road to Creighton, Missouri. West Virginia at home's weird, but it's not a bad loss in terms of metrics. Yeah. Iowa State, Houston, and on the road to Baylor. So not a bad loss, and I know that's helping their metrics. Also, wins over Duke, Michigan State really help based upon how both those teams are playing right now. Fully understand that. But, man, if you watch the product on the floor, Kansas, there's something missing. We talked about a Hunter Dickinson problem. I don't know if it's motivation. I don't know if it's lack of effort. But he's struggling right now. And their schedule in the Big 12 is still brutal. They've got Iowa State coming up. Yeah. Tell me a scenario. Yeah, tomorrow, actually, as we record this on Monday the 3rd. Yeah. Tell me both scenarios. Kansas loses that game at home to Iowa State. Again, not a bad loss, but it's their 3rd home loss. Where does that take them? And let's say in a world where they get hot, because after Iowa State, they get Kansas State, Colorado, Utah, BYU, Oklahoma State, Colorado again before they end the year with Texas Tech, Houston, and Arizona. There's a world where they win on Monday, they get hot. So what's kind of your outlook on Kansas from a bracketology standpoint and just what you see on the floor? Because there's clearly struggles right now, especially scoring the basketball.
So I think from like a bracketology standpoint, this Iowa State game's huge because, like you said, they do have a weaker schedule after this for a while. If they can kind of springboard or at least keep it close with Iowa State tomorrow, that's really going to help them. And then they've got to just go dominate all these inferior opponents before they get to that last brutal 3-game stretch. I will probably be picking this team to lose in the 1st or 2nd round in March. There's something off. This is proof that money doesn't just fix your team. So whatever happens, you need to actually put the team together, and it can't just be a bunch of stars in air quotes that are going to come and be great, because it doesn't happen.
You talk about losing. Well, look at your matchup with them. And that 13 seed has upset written all over it.
Yeah.
Akron is a team leading the MAC conference, the Mid-American Conference, 9-0, 16-5. They're on a 9-game win streak. That is as good a mid-major as you're finding. They play a high tempo. They're 14th in tempo. That's a really fun matchup if that happened. And I'm with you. I think Kansas would be in trouble. Akron's one of those mid majors to kind of keep an eye on. Memphis, real quick. I mean, the job Penny's doing this year, he's got a lot of flack over recent years, rightfully so, and I think he's even admitted as such.
Yeah,
he's done a really good job, and he's got a 3-headed guard monster that is good as any guards you'll find in the country. Kind of what's the ceiling? Obviously, Memphis doesn't play in a Power 5 conference, but what do you see when you see Memphis here?
So Memphis is super tough because their actual resume that they have right now, 5-1 in quadrant 1, they've got the wins to be a 3 or 4 seed, but their predictives are just so low, and they're stuck playing nothing but quadrant 3 and 4 games. The AAC is just awful, and it's just really hurt them. Their predictives aren't great, so unfortunately the committee will probably underseed them. But I do think from just like watching them, they're a very good team. So they're going to be a team that's a little underrated, I think.
Would it behoove Memphis? Because you correct me, you would obviously know more than I. I'm pretty sure I recall before the beginning of the year that the committee or the net or which one of the two values point differential now. So, like, if Memphis goes out and just blows out teams, it will help kind of that net ranking, right? So, is that kind of their not only win, but try to win by 20 plus if you can?
Yeah, so looking at their kind of going back, some of the games that I'm looking at with the point differential, UNLV, they only beat them by 6. That hurts your metrics. Louisiana Tech, you only beat them by 10 at home. That one hurts your metrics. You're playing around with these teams like UAB, Tulane, Wichita State, East Carolina. You're not blowing them out. That hurts metrics. So it's not that the committee will like actually look at, oh, you only beat ECU by 4, but they're baked into all of the different metrics, and it is a negative thing for them.
I'm glad you explained that because I wanted the viewers and listeners to understand that this year they are accounting in point differential. That's why you see in these non-con games, some of these power teams, when maybe they're 30 and usually they put their subs in, they want to try to get to 40, 45 to help that point differential later in the year. The last team in this region I want to talk about because we have to, which makes sense. We had Dusty May on the show today. Great interview. You guys need to go check that out. His Wolverines set 6th. They are in the hunt for a top 4 and still a Big Ten title if things go their way and some teams lose and they get on a hot streak here. You have them 6th. What do you like about Michigan kind of in this spot?
So I think Michigan, again, that 5-6, 4-5-6 really area is tough to seed right now. I wouldn't be upset if somebody like tried to push them up towards a 5. They've got a solid resume. That road win over Wisconsin is aging great. The win over Xavier is very close to being quad 1. So that's another team that they could look to. They're probably cheering for Xavier to win some games on the back end there as they climb closer to a quadrant 1 game. But other than that, just they've been consistent. They dropped that Minnesota game, which did hurt a little bit. But Minnesota is now a quadrant 2 team, at least when you're playing them at Minnesota. So no real bad losses or anything. I think Michigan will continue to climb. And I do like them as one of the top 3-4 teams in the Big Ten.
Interesting. Johnny's fans, I asked the question, so you're gonna have to just deal with that. But you got opportunities. You beat 3 seed in your same region right here, Marquette. You beat UConn, who was seeded a 9 seed. More than likely, you're not going to be a 7 very long. You're going to be trending in a higher direction.
Yeah.
Just keep winning games. But that is one of those cases that the metrics and the net and all that says one thing, but our eyeballs say that this team is not a 7 seed.
Yes.
It's one of those deals. Let's move on to the last region here. Let's go to the East, where you see Duke coming in as the number 1 seed. I think you have them 3rd in the seed line as overall 1 seeds, but they are headline in the East. And look at this East. If this was the bracket on Selection Sunday, look at the heavyweights in this lineup right here. Duke is the 1. Florida and that incredible offense, even though Tennessee without Zakai Ziegler stifled them. I want to ask you about Florida and that result. Creighton, who has been surging. We talked about New Mexico, who's been playing really good here lately. Kentucky still a 3. Believe me, I'm going to ask you. Illinois, who's faltering as well, a 5. Texas Tech surging. This is an incredible East Regional. Talk to me about what kind of your thought process on all this is.
So, Duke, they're playing in a terrible ACC. They did enough in the non-con to where they've pretty much wrapped up a 1 seed as long as they don't falter down the stretch. Baylor, Vanderbilt, both of those teams are hot, and they've just been kind of interesting teams throughout the year. Texas Tech, I do expect Texas Tech to end up as a 3 seed, so keep an eye on them. They're going to move up. Illinois, they finally got a win today. They beat Ohio State, kind of solidified themselves a little bit. 5-6 areas, good for them. Getting to Kentucky. Kentucky might have the best 7 wins in the country. Auburn might be the only team that you could argue has better wins right now. But, the wins over Duke and Gonzaga and those kinds of teams are just good. So Kentucky did enough to kind of give themselves some leeway. Yes, I know they've lost to Arkansas and the world's ending because Calipari came back and beat them at Rupp. I do understand you UK fans. I promise I was shocked as you all were.
Believe me, I was shocked.
The win over Louisville is now quadrant 1. Louisville is 30th even. They've got wins at Tennessee. The win over Duke and at Tennessee, you don't have anybody has 2 better wins than that right there.
Short-handed, mind you. That yes. Tennessee win earlier in the week, short-handed.
Yes. And Lamont Butler is still not back. I don't know if he's going to be back or when he's going to be back, but the committee they don't always do it, so do not say like they're 100% going to do it, but they can evaluate injuries, especially when it comes to the Arkansas and the Vanderbilt losses. That can kind of factor in just a little bit. So that can kind of give them a bump. But I do think this team with these elite wins had some wiggle room. That wiggle room may now be gone, but they're still okay for now on that 3 line.
Well, on Kentucky, obviously in the SEC, you've got quad 1s every day. Ole Miss coming up on Tuesday. You've still got Auburn to host at home. You still got a trip to Alabama. Still got a return game against Tennessee. So there's plenty of opportunities. Kentucky seems to be, when they play teams that maybe they're not supposed to beat according to media and the betting outlets, that's when they get up and beat these teams. But teams that they should hammer, like Vanderbilt, like Arkansas, like Georgia, they're losing to. If they continue this streak, let's say, let's look ahead. Let's say they beat Tennessee again. Let's say they go to Alabama and win. Let's say we don't even have to say they beat Auburn. Let's just say they go to Alabama and win. They beat Tennessee in the return. They beat Ole Miss on Tuesday. 3 incredible wins to add to that. That gets them 10 just phenomenal wins we talked about.
Yeah.
But then they lose some of those, right? Auburn withstanding. Where do they fall? That's such a tricky resume to look at. I know you just kind of laid out like injury and all that, but 10 incredible wins, these losses to teams that they should beat, like, is their floor at that point just like a 4, or do they drop to a 5?
I think their floor is a 4 in that scenario. Obviously, if they have a losing record the rest of the way out or something, we'll have a different conversation. But if they continue like they've done, they're probably going to end up as a 3 or a 4. I don't know if they'll get to a 2. Just the losses will become too much to move them up there. But I think that 3-4 line, kind of similar to last year's team, except this year's team's a little bit more potent on offense.
I think it's fair. Illinois, another team that's when they're on, and they can beat anybody in the country, but they've struggled here recently. They find themselves at a 5 seed. A couple of weeks ago when we talked, I think they were battling for like a 2. So they've taken a sharp dive, 3 whole seed lines.
Yep.
Inconsistency is really hurting them. I know Yakachonis missed some games, and that really hurt them. When you evaluate Illinois and their potential seed line for Selection Sunday, what do you see?
So, we talk about watching these teams. They are fouling way too much.
Mm-hmm.
They've got to figure it out. They got past Ohio State today. They ended up winning by 8, so that was a good win to kind of solidify themselves. Looking at it, they've played a ton of Q1 games. They have a ton of Q1 games left because the Big Ten's crazy. I think they're probably a 3 to 6 seed when all is said and done. Probably lean more towards a 4 and a 5. Just they do have those solid wins to kind of fall back on, like Wisconsin and some of these other games they've already taken care of. So I think they'll be okay. But yeah, they're a puzzling team that I could definitely see Drake upsetting if this
Last one I want to ask you about in this region here is Maryland. One of the I mean, last couple weeks they've had incredible wins. Home against Nebraska, away to Illinois and Indiana, back home on Wednesday against Wisconsin. That puts them at 7-4 in the Big Ten. They're right in the mix and 17-5 overall. Again, the Big Ten is going to present you with a lot of opportunities coming up. But they do avoid, well, they got to play Michigan State, but they avoid playing Purdue. They avoid playing Illinois again. There's a real opportunity for Maryland to go on a hell of a run and maybe end up with like 23, 24 wins at the end of the year. In that scenario, they get to that win mark. They're at 6 now. What's the ceiling for Maryland?
Probably a 3 or 4, just like Illinois. Honestly, it's hard because their non-conference schedule was just so bad, and then they lost their only like real meaningful game out of conference. But I mean, when they played Northwestern on the 16th of January and lost, I had them out of the bracket. They've won 4 in a row. They've jumped all the way up to 6th seed. That is a quad 2 and then 3 quad 1 wins in a row. So they are absolutely doing what they need to. And I don't see a reason why they can't shoot for a 3 or 4. The movement up the bracket will start to slow now, but those teams in that like 8 to like 10 range are just so weak that they were able to jump them pretty quickly.
Look, in this theoretical bracket, it's no surprise I'm a lifelong Kentucky fan. Look, I think Kentucky should get by Bryant. You would hope. They get Maryland in that second round with Derek Queen on the inside, and if Julian Reese gives a good game, like that's a tricky matchup for the Cats in this theoretical bracket here. But also, I mean, look at the potential opportunities if this was your bracket 6 weeks from today on Selection Sunday. You could have Duke and Texas Tech Sweet 16, or Duke and Illinois. You could have Kentucky, Maryland in the second round, or you could have Kentucky and Florida in another game in the Sweet 16. Kentucky, Duke in the Elite 8. Duke, Florida. There's so many possibilities. I love when we put it in bracket form.
Yeah.
It gets me excited because the theoretical matchups here, like it's so fun. And with Vanderbilt's offense, like maybe they get a first round win over Baylor because Baylor's been up and down. And then who knows what they can do against Duke. I love this so much, man. And I appreciate you. I know we all do here at ECB. And you're one of the best. So that's why we come to you. People that watch this, obviously we still have 6 weeks left to go until the full thing comes out. But Hunter is great at what he does. We wanted to give you kind of a sneak peek at what he's thinking based upon what the criteria that the committee has shown that they value. And I think this would be as close to representation as what we will see if the bracket was revealed today, as it will be in 6 weeks from now. Hunter, tell everybody where they can find you, kind of your final thoughts on the whole bracket process and all that.
So again, thank you all so much for having me. I do appreciate it. Everything's obviously going to change a ton. So this bracket, while it's fun, it's more to generate conversation. So I appreciate being able to come on and just talk about teams because that's what we're here to do. You can find me on Twitter at Bracket NKY. That is my main platform for everything. So I would just recommend finding me on there. Other than that, I host a weekly Spaces on Friday night. So come in, you can ask me any questions you want or anything like that. But other than that, I just appreciate being able to come back on today.
Well, we appreciate the hell out of you, and we will work to try to get another one done in a couple weeks when we see more updates and all of that. We're getting closer to time. I can't, like I said, 6 weeks from today, if my math is correct, that we will have the full bracket reveal about this time of day too, 4:08 p.m. Eastern time, maybe a little bit later than that, but you get the point. We appreciate Hunter. Go follow him. He's a great follow. Go check out. He releases his kind of seed lines throughout the week, multiple times a week. Great follow. He's a voter in ECB Top 25. But wrapping it up for us here today, we hope you enjoyed kind of this making the madness, fielding madness, however you want to look at the full field of 68 bubble. If your team's on the bubble, pray that they get work done. If you want your team like St. John's to go away from that 7 line that we, on court suggests that they're better than, go beat Marquette, go beat UConn. Same with all these other teams. Hunter, we appreciate you, man. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Leave a like, follow, subscribe, all that fun stuff. You can catch us at ECB Podcast 10 on Twitter, where we do a lot of work. Our live shows go up weekly on Thursday and Sunday. We also are here on YouTube. Go give us a follow, subscribe, all that, and we will catch you guys down the road. Peace.